We're very glad to welcome you all to this afternoon's presentation. So I will reintroduce myself briefly for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet. And then we'll do a little bit of repeating just for the benefit of the folks who are new. But this afternoon's session is a little bit of a deeper dive into all three of the models that we covered earlier this morning. To look at their limitations, their strengths, what makes models good, what makes them not so good, what makes them just ugly. So we won't spend a whole lot of time in that final category, but we have to include it. My name is Randy White. I direct the Center for Community Transformation at Fresno Pacific University. We have a number of community initiatives. If you're interested in that organization, there's this blue handout on the side table. Feel free to take one. You'll notice on it we have 4 community initiatives, one of which is social enterprise, which you'll learn more about, one of which is financial literacy training, and we use the Chalmers Center Material Faith and Finances. We are a certified hub for faith and finance training. One is Latinx leadership certification, working with Latino and Spanish-speaking pastors and leaders to equip them for community transformation. And then the final category is city shaping. We do anti-human trafficking work, we do homelessness training, and we do a number of things with the mayor's office to get people of faith involved in neighborhood revitalization. But our premier emphasis and initiative is social enterprise. We've helped now to catalyze 43 small social businesses in our city. And our city is Fresno, California, which has the second highest rate of concentrated poverty of any large city in the United States. And my wife and family and I moved to the highest poverty neighborhood of that city 26 years ago, and for the last couple of decades have been engaged in all sorts of involvement in neighborhood transformation activities, raised our children there, and are still there, and still using it as a laboratory to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And after 26 years of seeing programs come and go, we're beginning to see some hope in this methodology called social enterprise. So we've looked at the category of social enterprise. In our first workshop today, what is it? What is a social enterprise? We've said that a social entrepreneur is someone who has human flourishing as their primary goal. Flourishing, and that concept rooted in shalom, that Hebrew concept that's so comprehensive, making things the way it ought to be in people, for people, and between people. We've said that social enterprises are concerned about people, they're concerned about the planet, and they're concerned about profit. They have to be concerned about profit, because no margin, no mission. Right? So the eye is on the mission, but the eye has got to be on the business. You have to measure for the mission and measure for the business. Measure for impact, measure for profit. If it's not measurable, it's not real. And so we're focused on making sure that the system is going to operate as well as get the kinds of outcomes that we want. So, and Steve Elkington and the whole people, planet, profit paradigm is a very easy way to remember it. But at its core, entrepreneurship is simple. It's simply one who takes on a project. In our case, that project is human flourishing in a neighborhood, in an individual's life, etc. After laying that foundation, then we went through a case study of how one city is creating an ecosystem for social enterprise through the Spark Tank, kind of like Shark Tank without the teeth. Spark Tank stimulates churches and individuals to pitch ideas that have a chance to be sustainable through revenue. And now we've awarded 43 startup awards with an almost 60% success rate, which is double the national average after 3 years. And we went through a lot of those numbers during the last session. So if you're interested in the metrics of this and you didn't make those other 2 sessions, all of the PowerPoints with all of our metrics are available to you. You just have to ask the True Charity folks, and they'll send them along. We've seen examples. I've told some stories about the 43 social businesses we've started, and now we want to basically dive deeper into the models and see what works and what doesn't work. We're using these categories started by Alec Nichols of the Skoll Center at Oxford University of embedded, external, and integrated. And let me just review, for those of you who are new, what those three categories mean. The first one is embedded. And this is where the activity of the business actually is the mission. And the example I gave was Community Music School. They're giving music lessons, instrumental lessons, to kids from poor neighborhoods whose schools don't have music programs. Very simple model. When they deliver that lesson, that is, they've embedded the social part of the enterprise into the activity. It's a very simple model, clearly embraceable, by the way, by investors as well, and clearly attractive to all levels of customer, to the kid, because they have a sliding scale where the kid pays a fee, but to school districts as well that don't have music programs that they have to run and pay for it at a very high cost. Instead, they can subcontract with community music school, and at least the kids get something. So that has a decent customer base. The other model was an external model. We used the example of Lana Coffee, which buys green beans from farmers in Thailand that used to grow opium. And they converted them to coffee, and then this American company in Fresno roasts the coffee, sells the coffee, and then returns 30% of the proceeds back to those farmers to dig clean water wells. When you ask Lana Coffee, what's your mission? They say clean water is our mission. They could be selling widgets, they could be selling popcorn, they could be selling anything else. It doesn't really matter. Although in this case it kind of matters a little because they're buying the crop from those very farmers that are going to benefit from the clean water as well. So it's a virtuous circle right there, which is wonderful. It's not necessary for this model to work, but in this case it's a wonderful add-on. But that's an external model. They could be selling anything. The product is unrelated really to the ultimate mission of clean water in that context. The final model was an integrated model where the activity actually overlaps the mission. And I've told the story of Rockpile Yard Service, where men coming out of prison learn water-wise landscaping techniques and watering systems. They install those and they learn work skills in the process, get a little cash, get something to put on a resume. They learn how to show up on time and take directions, and we begin to see the church that runs that business come around them and support, and it's why that business succeeds. That's the secret sauce, the love that they can wrap around those individuals. So these are the three models, and so what I'd like to do is look a little bit more deeply at each of these. These are, for those of you who weren't here this morning, these are some of the companies that we've helped to catalyze through the Spark Tank process. And they're all sorts, from a branding company to a kind of a 10,000 Villages-like store, to a coffee shop employing women coming out of rehab, to a beautiful upscale thrift shop run by really an artist. Company I'll tell you about later today, 701 United. It's a fitness club for inner city kids, Lightwear. It's kind of a bling company for women, and they're put together by women in rehab. King's Gospel is a recycling center. Missio Dei Cafe is a cafe run by a church. Moving on up, works with men also coming out of prison, etc. So lots of those. 260 people employed, people who had barriers to employment. Success rate of 58%. 100K invested over the last 3 years, and that 100K has produced $3.72 million in revenue, which we know is a drop in the bucket, but is very significant for everybody, all the families of those people employed, the neighborhoods, the churches they're connected to. Everybody wins by that kind of revenue being generated. So let's look a little bit more closely at these three models. They all have strengths. They all have limitations. The embedded model, again, that's where the activity is the mission. And by the way, all of these can be either a service or a product. There are strengths and limitations related to both, whether it's a service or a product. Let's look at the embedded category. Why would you create an embedded approach as an enterprise? What are you going for when you create an exchange model, a revenue model, a direct mission model, which is the embedded approach? The strengths are, as we've watched, this is not philosophy, by the way, this is just what we've observed. And everything I'm going to tell you is just stuff we've observed. I think it's supported by philosophy. I think it's supported by other places that are doing similar things, but I'm not that kind of speaker that tries to generalize and come up with universal principles. I hope you know everything I'm sharing with you is just out of the case study of what we've seen over the last 7 years in our own city. So I recognize different contexts might have different lessons, but as we've observed each of these models, these are the essential lessons that we're pulling out of them. That the strengths of the embedded model are often born out of the passion of the founder. This is someone who cares about homeless men. This is someone who cares about women coming out of rehab. This is somebody who cares about human trafficking. Maybe she was trafficked herself. It's the passion of the founder that provides the strength and that carries it through tough times too. It doesn't matter almost to the founder how well the enterprise is doing. The enterprise could be losing money, and then their spouse could be, a nurse or have a regular job with real income that will help carry them through that time. But they'll keep doing it, even though they're not sure if it can become revenue generating and self-sustaining. They'll take it through years doing that. Why? Their passion carries them through. And that's a huge strength when you're trying to birth something, right? So if you're a CBO leader, if you're a social worker and you see a pattern in the lives of the people you're working with, and there is something about that pattern that just kills you every time you see it, you keep saying to yourself, I wish I could deal with just that thing. Right? I have this idea that might work. I mean, you got to listen to those voices. There's the growth and the birth maybe of a passion. And that passion can develop into a structure, and that structure can actually be sustainable. But you won't know that until you go through a few years. But because of your passion, you're willing to do that. Now that's the inherent strength of the embedded model. The guy who does community music school loves to play clarinet, and he just wants kids to learn clarinet. It's a passion of his. It's like, I kind of like clarinet. It's okay. I could probably live without it, but not this guy. All right? So pay attention to those voices. But the problem is that the strength of the embedded model is also really its weakness. It's really its limitation. Because what happens when the passion moves on? What happens when the founder has a heart attack? What happens when they hand off and now there's a second generation leadership? Passion is never enough for the long term. Passion births things really well. Passion is helpful to sustain things, but you really need workable systems to sustain things. And so that's part of its limitation. It has another limitation too. We've noticed this among the embedded models that we work with, and that's that the leaders tend to think like nonprofit leaders, not like business people. So they're always looking for grants, instead of just putting all their eggs in making the business plan work, like a normal business would do. And this mind shift that has to take place in the mind of somebody who's been steeped in the world of community benefit organizations, if they're starting an enterprise model, to change that mindset to say, I've got to start thinking like a business. Now, I might do a hybrid model, right, where I'm still seeking independent funding from impact investors that don't care about a return on investment, plus the thing I'm selling, the service or product I'm selling. I might do a hybrid, but the goal here is to become self-sustaining. And we'll talk a little bit more about the way we play with that goal or skirt around that goal when we look at other models. But if I had to say what are the one or two strengths and limitations of the embedded model, that's what I'd pick. The passion as a strength, and the limitations being actually surrounding the passion of the founder, and also their tendency to think like a nonprofit rather than a business. In the external model, remember the external model is I'm just going to dedicate a portion of our profits, and I'm going to dedicate that to a mission. So the strengths of this model is the simplicity of a business focus. Now this is almost entirely a business model, because if I don't have margin, if I'm not making money here, I don't have anything to give. The activity of the business is actually not the mission. It's the profit of the business that leads to the mission. So you have the basic simplicity of a traditional business focus with a very embraceable social impact. If you're public about your mission goal, people will buy your product to support your mission, at least once. At least once. As we'll learn in other models like this one, if your product sucks, fool me once, but you won't fool me twice. And I don't care how good your mission is if I don't like your coffee or if I don't like the thing you're selling. So, but in this case, if you're not careful, this works with almost any product. Like I said, Lana Coffee sells coffee. The story I shared this morning of the 5 teens in Montreal who formed a little chocolate company, it was the intent of the director to simply have them learn about money, and instead they learned about hygiene, they learned about cooking, they learned about marketing, they put a website together, they learned about sales, then they had to do accounting, and then they had to get banked. Look at all those learning points, right? That was beautiful, but the product was chocolate, and it had to be a good product. It really doesn't matter what product it is in the external model. Anything that's legal, I would say, right? Okay, but a bad product won't work. Now the problem and the limitation, as I see with this model, is if you're not careful, it can become detached from the mission. Reduced a little more than writing a check, and in bad years, that check might not be as much. You might start giving 30%, but next year, it's not been that great a year, it's got to be 20, and then the year after that, it's got to be 10, and now you're really what Amy Minnick calls a tithing company. You're really not. And maybe because you haven't been able to take that trip back to Thailand to see those clean water wells that your money was building, and that now you're kind of detached from the Thai farmers, and now that picture you've had on your wall for 4 years, that shows the Thai farmer, that was the former director of the coffee company. Well, how come you're not in that picture anymore? What's happening with the Thai farmers? I haven't been there in a while, I'm not really sure. You see how that works? So the limitation of this is that you could become detached from your mission because you're only, in your mind, you're just writing a check. The companies that do this well are very current. All the stuff on their walls, it's clear to all customers what this company's about when they come into the place. Finally, the integrated model. This is where the activity of the business overlaps mission. The beauty of this model is the potential dual impact. It's using the rock pile landscaping model. It's the fact that they're doing, in drought-stricken California, they're helping people replace their big thirsty lawns with water-wise landscaping that uses drip irrigation. And these guys are learning that. It's a real skill, but it's the process of doing it where they're being mentored by people of faith that are loving them and helping them heal and repair their lives. It's that dual impact. It's either people and planet or people and product. That is the beauty of that system. The limitation of that system is that it's susceptible to, depending on the mission, to sell a lousy product. And it just doesn't work. People they learn that in a very short period of time that they love your heart, but they don't love your product, and they're not going to come back. It's also, and this is the dirty little secret of social enterprise, it's also susceptible to exploiting workers. Because often what happens in this model is that their workers are not being paid. They're part of a rehab program, and they're working in a coffee shop, and it's part of their rehab. It's sort of included in their room and board, the expectation that they'll work in this coffee shop. The coffee shop's generating revenue, which goes back to the mission to help pay for the services that the women are receiving, but they're really being paid nothing in the actual enterprise. It's one of the reasons the enterprise can survive. We have an example of that. It's an amazingly beautiful ministry, but several of us that have looked at it are starting to talk to the owner about it. It's like, how comfortable are you with the fact that women aren't making anything in this process? And we know you're giving them a lot, all their food, their rent. I mean, it's not nothing that you're giving to them. But could you grow into a model where you could actually survive as a business, like every other coffee shop has to do, and pay your workers at the same time? So it's a little bit of a gray area right there, but it is susceptible. You see what I'm saying? It's susceptible. Did I spell susceptible correct? Yes, I did. Okay. To exploiting workers, and it's something that we have to be careful about. Now, these are blunt reductions. I recognize that. These are summaries of things that we've seen and noticed from the 43 enterprise models that we've helped to stimulate and catalyze. And there are certainly others as well. And by the way, you see a blank by service there under external, because we just have not had a good example of an external service model social enterprise. So I didn't have one to share with you. Here's an example of an embedded format in Fresno. Actually, this is from my neighborhood. 701 comes from the zip code 93701. This is the so-called Devil's Triangle that I was telling you about. This is where I live, just down the street from my house. The founder was a former Bulldog gang member and came to Christ, began to sense that kids in the neighborhood, because they were fatherless, they had no boundaries, they had no self-respect, and also they were as into technology as all kids are these days, and not physically fit. They went immediately to violence, but a lot of that violence was group-oriented. 5 kids beating up one kid in a kind of a gang format. And it's because none of them were confident. They had no internal locus of their identity and consciousness based on their value and worth as a person. And so he said, you know what? I'm learning stuff in my own martial arts, and I'd like to see kids learn how to do martial arts and learn that much more measured. Martial arts are much more about not using those skills actually, but having the confidence to, if you need to. So they founded a fitness club. These kids all pay to belong to the fitness club, but it's really fitness/discipleship. So they'll meet in a circle on this mat for Bible study. They'll all have sort of mentors assigned to them. It's a quality product. They have people from different studios, martial arts studios, mixed martial arts as well, from around Fresno come in and act as their teachers. There's a clear social impact on the lives of the urban youth in a high crime neighborhood. I can tell you so many stories coming out of this where groups of kids in this club put down violence. Violence that was bubbling and ready to happen when these kids stepped in and diffused the situation, because they were learning those techniques, right? Violence reduction and tension reduction and the ability to diffuse a situation. They were learning those techniques here. The limitations are they still think like a nonprofit as well, which really prevents their growth, their efficiency, and their best practices. They'll never forget taking a group by to stand in front of the director and having him tell them all about it. And he was just doing backflips to avoid anything that sounded like a business. He even went to the competitor which is about 4 blocks away, there's another martial arts studio, and said to them, now look, we don't want you to think that we're competing with you in any way. You're just so conscious about not wanting to offend or compete. It took everything for us to say, look, you are a business. You know you're a business. You're taking revenue. Act like a business. Be proud of that. This is not just a program of somebody else's deal. If you treat it like a Youth for Christ program, which is where it's housed, then it can come and go, and based on the whim of that director, if you don't create a self-sustaining component here. And thankfully he listened. And we just did a metrics project. We just collected their data this summer. We have a metrics project every summer for all of our enterprises that are related to us. And we saw things in their accounting system that were awful. And so we're connecting someone with better accounting skills to tutor them and give them a better system. So helping them to improve their systems. And the reason they had a poor accounting system is this was the one that was available at their nonprofit. Nonprofits aren't really known for having cutting edge accounting systems. So this is a tendency in all forms and formats. This is one of the formats where that happens. Now, this is also a hybrid model. They do take donations, but they also collect fees from the kids as well. This is an example of an integrated model. Sorry, I have to do it here too. This is an example of an integrated model in Fresno. A church in Fresno was working with a lot of guys coming out of prison. So they created a moving company called Moving On Up. It employs men coming out of prison. The name is a double entendre. They are a moving company, but they help men move on up out of their circumstances. They deliver a good product, often helping elderly customers with moving needs, but they're delivering a new man to society. They're helping avoid recidivism, training employees for better employment. They've helped more than 24 men move on to other full-time jobs elsewhere because of their experience relearning what it means to work, and being wrapped around by the love of this church for men in this process. They train them, they mentor them, they connect them. Now, their strengths include the fact that they are anchored at a church, which does provide some financing. There's clear mission that's easily explained to people. The human and physical assets of the church are able to assist in this process, and that's why they're sustainable. The church doesn't give a lot of money to them at all. It's mostly just human assets. Do they need a truck? Well, somebody in the church had one. Do they need a dolly? Somebody in the church had one, and we'll let them use it for a while. And slowly they're building those internal mechanisms they're going to need to buy their own dolly, to buy their own truck. In fact, they just got a truck. So the church has provided kind of the seedbed where a lot of this can evolve slowly. Their limitations, they can only offer part-time to a small crew, and they are one of 3 businesses owned by that church, and a small community benefit staff. Now, when that's the case, who's getting the attention? You have a small community benefit organization staff, and they're running 3 businesses. Which business gets the priority? So this is the inherent difficulty when faith institutions own and run businesses, is there somebody fully dedicated who wakes up thinking just about moving on up every day? How can we build this business? How can we employ more of these men? What are the pipelines we can access for men who need the training? Every day they're dreaming about that, and they're only dreaming about that. This business does not have the benefit of that right now, and that's a limitation. And many churches face those kinds of limitations. So what have we learned from success, from some of the models that are more successful? Well, there are some things. So King's Cornerstone Recycling works with homeless men. They are kind of a hybrid model between integrated and embedded. What's worked well? Well, the environmental mission is needed. You know, they're saving stuff from going in the landfill. We all recognize that. Everybody thinks recycling is good. Society participates in recycling. Some cities require it. So the system is there. This activity prepares homeless men for employment, and former customers become employees. It's worked exceedingly well. Ray, I just was out there 3 weeks ago. Ray, the guy running that enterprise, 2.5 years ago was on the streets as one of the homeless guys, collecting cans and turning them into the recycling center. Now he runs the program. The light of Christ streaming out of his eyes as he's doing it. Does it with a smile and a song. Handles all the money. This is a self-sustaining program. What did we learn from that? Well, when you can solve a dual problem, that's a win. Okay, what was the dual problem? There's a genuine need in the community. Junk, right? How do we get rid of this junk? We don't want to put it in the landfill. That's a need. That can be solved by something else that was seen as a problem in the community. Men who regarded themselves as junk, whom society thinks is junk. They're the ones solving the problem, the first problem. And in the process of solving the first problem, they're solving the second problem. Do y'all see how that works? So that's a lesson learned from success. When you can solve a dual problem, that's an amazing model. Rockpile Landscaping. The assets of a faith institution wrap around the people and the structures. That's universally true of the models that work the best. When they're anchored in proximity to a faith institution that sees it as theirs, then the assets of that faith institution are at the disposal. And it's mostly the human relationship that is the most important. The money helps, the tools help and things like that, but really it's the human capital in the faith institution that helps. What do we learn? Mindset is, where am I? Dedicated leadership is essential to navigate the ups and downs and the changes in personnel. When it works, it's because the leadership of that anchoring institution builds constancy. When the businesses themselves experience ups and downs, the leadership of the institution can build continuity. That's across the board, no matter what model we're talking about. Lana Coffee, transitioning from a nonprofit to a structure to a for-profit structure. When the current leader took over, it was a nonprofit, limping along, being propped up by huge multi-thousand-dollar gifts from a local and wealthy donor. It's kind of their baby. But the structure was such that they really couldn't grow at all because of the limitations of that one donor and that one donor's involvement. So one of my former students said the only hope for this thing is to go for profit. And he took it over with the intent to do that. The board got behind him and he quintupled the business. They're now at Whole Foods. They're now at Safeway. They're now at Costco. It's remarkable what's happened with that business. So the structure they chose, going from a nonprofit to a for-profit, seems to have worked well. And mindset is everything. If there's always a safety net, no one takes the necessary risks. If you know someone else is always going to catch you, and you don't wake up in a cold sweat every once in a while, like every business person should, then it's very likely you're not going to run hard when you need to run hard. And when you're talking about social enterprise, you're talking about something more complex than a traditional business. So you need to run hard. Tagua Fair Trade, they're like a 10,000 villages thing. They started as a pop-up, so they had no overhead. They do a fair at a university or an event in a neighborhood, and they had like 5 tables, full of stuff that was crafted in a developing country, but they would market it here in these pop-up events. And then somebody said, hey, there's a vacant store at a really popular shopping center in town called Fig Garden Village. Maybe you could do a holiday thing there. Sure enough, the village they couldn't rent that space. It was a tiny little space. So they made it available to Tagua, and they had such amazing success there that the management company of the shopping center offered them 3 more months. That went so well, the management company offered them 6 more months. That went so well, they've given them a contract, and they're able to pay their own way there. They started as a pop-up, putting 3 or 4 tables up at a neighborhood event, and now They're in probably one of the finest shopping centers in the city. So, go the route where you don't have a big bricks and mortar right away. See if your concept works. See if people like it. And that leads to other opportunities. A proof of concept takes time and allows you to work out the kinks. After you've worked out the kinks, then it's location, location, location. Those are lessons that we've learned from that model. Cornerstone Coffee. This one church had a vacant commercial space, not being used, and they asked the leader of a rehab center if she would like to use it as a coffee space. She did. The first year they made $70 a day, not enough to survive, but the church continued to give them that free space. Now they're doing about just close to $800 a day, and that's generating revenue for their ministry. Hybrid models. By hybrid, I mean she's getting revenue, but she's also receiving in-kind gift from the church, the space. Enjoy an advantage that traditional businesses don't. And I have to think that's another reason why this model works. Traditional business is hard enough. They don't have the advantage of a church that's willing to say, yeah, use this space, right? That's of advantage. Rockpile is doing about, King's Cornerstone, they're doing about $8,000 a month. Rockpile's about $12,000 a month. Lana Coffee, $67,000 a month. And Tagua, about $26,000 a month. Cornerstone, about $21K. Now, failure. What did we learn from failure? Valley Edible Landscaping was not only a water-wise landscaping company, but a company that really featured local, indigenous kinds of plants, led by a master gardener. He loved gardening. Every day he got up and thought about growing things. His own house was, there was 100 different varieties of things you could eat in his garden. Unbelievable. But they really had insufficient systems in place to train and manage their target population. They were doing $20,000 a month. They hired 4 or 5 guys coming out of prison and others. But they had no system for screening them, no system for mentoring them, no system for holding them accountable. Why? Because the owner just loved growing things. That was his thing. He really didn't want to learn all the HR stuff, and he had no system in place. Right, so what went wrong? Insufficient systems in place. What would we learn? Social enterprises are not individualistic efforts. They need to depend on a supportive ecosystem. He needed a crazy quilt approach. We talked about that early today. A crazy quilt made up of patches of other quilts. He needed a team made up of different people who had different skill sets. We did a little debrief of the failure of Valley Edible Landscapes, and some of the business guys in the community, they're just shaking their head thinking, you know what, the solution to their problem was so simple. Take the management of his work crews out of his hands. Let him do the design stuff. Let him buy the plants. Get somebody in there to supervise his crew that actually had come from the populations. That's why Rockpile Yard Services working in Valley Edible Landscapes isn't working or didn't work. Skate Inc. This was a guy coming out of the gangs, all tatted up, but an artist, knew a bunch of kids in the neighborhood, and they're all, and he loves skateboards and they love skateboards, and so he created an art company called Skate Inc. Kind of a combination, tattoos for skateboards. Now, isn't that creative? Have you ever heard that concept before? No. Utterly creative idea. Tattoos for skateboards, because it's a definite style, right? So he did it, and I'm so sorry I don't have pictures for you. My assistant, who has one literally hanging on her wall, I was going to have her take one, but I completely forgot. But they're charging $150 for these. People were buying them as art. People who never skateboarded a day in their lives were buying these things as art. And a local nonprofit hosted it. He had, you go in his office, a huge stock of blank skateboards. He was working with kids in the neighborhood. But then, guess what happened? He got married to a gal who found a job in Denver. And so he moved to Denver. And his agency is like, wait, does anybody else here know how to draw? All the staff are like, no. And it's like, oh my gosh, we founded a business plan that no one knows how to implement without Gabe. He's gone now. What do we do? That's all it took. So the director with the passion and the skill moved. And so models that are dependent on a unique leader are by definition volatile. And if you have a model like that, you've got to think about what happens when you have that person with the skill that's gone. Because he showed that it worked. He showed that it was a product that people wanted. He showed that the kids wanted to do that activity. He showed that it was so good to be with the kids as they did this art together. The whole thing was beautiful until he moved. All right, Say Hello Advertising was an advertising, kind of an ad distribution company that a political leader could use to distribute ads, or a restaurant could use to deliver a lunch flyer to a business district. And their problem was they had a leader with insufficient skill and inadequate supervision, and he just dropped balls over and over again. And they unfortunately developed a reputation in the community as stay away from them. They don't do a good job. It doesn't take much. A worthy mission is not enough to compensate for a poor product. You all get that? A worthy mission is not enough to compensate for a poor product. Tree of Life Cafe. This is hard to even tell you. We're still smarting from this one. This is our premier model in Fresno, California. An incredibly talented, passionate woman, nutrition specialist, created a restaurant, beautiful restaurant in every way, aesthetically beautiful, farm fresh food, farm to fork as they call it. And they also had a son in rehab, so they started hiring people coming out of the rescue mission. And I showed some of their pictures earlier today. I'll show them again at the end of this time. They had a downtown location because they believed in downtown revitalization, and they were just too early on the edge of that curve. They survived there for 2-3 years, had a huge loyal following. They were on social media. They did everything right. Then they just realized we don't have enough customers, and people tell us it's tough to find parking down here, and some people have a bad attitude about downtown. They're afraid of it. So we'll move north. So they moved north, got free parking, they got a better shopping center, and it took them 6 months, and they just were not making it. The money was not there. They didn't have enough customers. Husband was a CPA. You could not have picked a better couple. I mean, they did everything right. And yet, 4 weeks ago, they had to close their door. And it was a punch in the stomach for us. It's our best model. But we think location problems and cash flow. Restaurants are just hard business. I mean, there's such a small profit margin. So they were suffering from cash flow and location problems. And that's basically the lesson, even for passionate, skillful owners. Sometimes it doesn't work. And this will keep you humble. You know, business is just hard. Social enterprise adds another layer of complexity. And that one's a tough pill to swallow. There are other models, other things we've learned from failure, but let me move on. So if I want to, again, boil things down to kind of the brute, simplest of terms, here's what we get. Key characteristics of good, marginal, and ugly social enterprises. Good enterprises are sustainable in their format. They work. The owners manage for mission, to accomplish their mission. In other words, their eye is always on the ultimate goal of the impact that they seek. And they structure everything to sustain and support that mission. And then they measure it. If it's not measured, it's not real to them. Marginal social enterprises have a questionable product or service. They may be hoping their mission sells their product. And they really don't intentionally structure things to achieve mission. Rather than an empirical approach to measurement, they have a story or two of impact, and that's enough for them. We think these are marginal because they have the chance to be converted to sustainable. But they really could go either way. And what we call ugly social enterprises make unsubstantiated claims. They measure nothing. How they go about their business may even violate their stated purpose or the people they employ. And the pictures on their brochures are only symbolic and don't represent their true scope or impact. How do we measure these various models? How do you measure a model where the service is actually embedded? Okay, you ask questions like this. How many people did you serve and how did that number compare to last year? Did the people you served, in other words, your employees, achieve personal milestones that indicate progress or growth, such as acquisition of skill sets or competencies, clearing warrants, getting a driver's license, regaining custody of children, getting permanent housing, getting banked, repairing their credit, or some other indicator? These are the questions we ask our enterprises that are in the embedded model. What indicators of change do you use to measure your impact on their lives? And we ask them to actually give examples. What tools have you created to measure this impact? Do you do before or after surveys as a form of benchmarking, etc.? These are some of the actual questions we use every year in an annual metrics project to test the validity and the veracity of these systems. This embedded model here is called Elevate Technologies and Teleenergy. It's an embedded model. They're providing sustainable, reliable electric light for developing countries and for local and international employment. They're using some of the hard-to-hire folks in Fresno to actually assemble these, and then they're being distributed through distributors in developing countries, and so there's money being made at that end in the local economy as well by distributors. John just got sick this last year from, they think this room is in a building in a part of Fresno that had a toxic problem, and he's now experiencing cognitive difficulties. So please say a prayer for John. But this is a fantastic product. This is a picture of remember I told you about Community Music School? Here's the leader of Community Music School buying these lights to use as orchestra lights. Isn't that wild? You just, in the daytime, soak up the sun, at the night, use it in the orchestra. It'll be a lot of fun. So the external model then, the metrics we would use are, were you able to deliver revenue toward the mission? If so, how much, more or less than last year? What percent of your profit do you designate to support the external organization and their mission? Did the organization you support achieve measurable progress as a result of your support? If so, what did they achieve? How does this influence your decision to support them? How is your mission explained to your customers, and what evidence was there that your customers were aware of, understood, or embraced the mission? These are a few questions we would ask an external model as well. Here's Lana Coffee that I was telling you about, along with the water wells that they're drilling as a result of their local sales. This is an example of an external model social enterprise. Every cup of Lana Coffee creates clean water wells for the hill tribes of northern Thailand. We're really proud to be in relationship with them. Final model was the integrated model, and this is where usually the employees are the mission. So if your mission is the employee worker in your care, consider measuring progress over time in these areas. Their grooming and appearance, their dependability, their work quality and quantity, their cooperation and attitude. Do they follow instructions? After working at your enterprise, did employees go on to other or better employment? If yes, quantify. Did employees achieve personal milestones? And those are the same as that other model. And do you have other specific measures of progress? If it's not measured, it's not real. So back to Tree of Life. I told the last group about Sal and Sandra. Sal was a notorious gang member in Fresno. His street name was Knockout. And Sandra ran the guns for her gang. Both of them were employed by Carolyn at Tree of Life Cafe and Bakery. Sal became the best blueberry scone baker in the city of Fresno. He went back to high school, actually along with his daughter, who was in high school. And I told the group last hour, I was in a meeting with him not long ago where he was discussing with us the correct use of the semicolon. Notorious gang member, now talking about punctuation and grammar. evaluating a poet that he was hearing. After Tree of Life closed, we all wondered what was going to happen to all the employees that they had invested in so much. And well, Sal got picked up as one of the lead bakers for La Boulangerie in Fresno, the best French bakery in Fresno. Sandra got picked up by the same organization. And the crazy thing about it is that they're launching a downtown located store just 5 blocks from my house, and only about 4 blocks from where Tree of Life was originally. So now he was so sad when they left downtown to go to North Fresno because all of his friends are downtown. Now he's being able to go back downtown again. So he's going to be one of their lead bakers for La Boulangerie. God is good, and used that time at Tree of Life to prepare him to have a real life where God is putting the pieces back together in his life. I know that we're out of time, and so if you have questions about any of the models that we've shared, I encourage you to send them into Slido and put this question is for Randy, and then maybe that'll move to a place where we can ask it and answer it in the final panel discussion. The next session in here is our final session, and we're going to talk about the spirituality of entrepreneurship and the entrepreneur. We're looking at Christian scriptures that really form a foundation for how to stay in the game, how to do this even when it's hard, how to do it when it doesn't work, and what can you learn from that, and what will sustain you over the long haul for believing that enterprise is a way to repair the social fabric. So we encourage you to think about staying. Thank you very much.